My name is Commander James Harrington, Royal Navy. I have served at sea for 23 years, in waters the Foreign Office would rather not see mentioned in the press. Basra and the Shat al-Arab in 2003, Helmand Province ashore in 2009 and again in 2012, the Straits of Hormuz on nights when the tension was thick enough to taste, and, though it remains unacknowledged, a shadowed deployment in the South China Sea in 2018, trailing ships whose flags we were instructed to observe but not provoke. I have commanded frigates, destroyers, and for one intense year, a carrier strike group operating alongside the U.S. Navy in the Persian Gulf. I have been mentioned in dispatches, promoted ahead of my year group, and occasionally reprimanded for interpreting orders in ways that produced decisive results. In short, I thought I understood modern naval warfare. This is not an official NATO report. It is not intended for the files at Northwood or Norfolk, Virginia. It is a private journal, written in the small hours after each day of a bilateral exercise held off the California coast in the autumn of 2025. I set it down now because I witnessed something I did not expect, and because a certain strain of British pride, the cold, understated variety, requires that I record the truth before time blunts its edge. In August 2025, I was ordered by the fleet commander to proceed to San Diego for Exercise Pacific Crown, a 2-week series of opposed naval drills between a Royal Navy carrier strike group centered on HMS Queen Elizabeth and the U.S. Third Fleet built around USS Abraham Lincoln. The stated purpose was interoperability and alliance cohesion. The unstated purpose, at least among my staff and me, was to demonstrate that overwhelming technological advantage is no substitute for centuries of accumulated institutional wisdom. I accepted the task with something approaching enthusiasm. The Royal Navy may no longer rule every wave, but we still conduct ourselves as though we do. I believed, that tactical subtlety, iron discipline, and a certain imperturbable coolness under pressure would prove superior to American advantages in sensors, computing power, and raw tonnage. After all, we had been doing it since Trafalgar. They had been doing it since Midway. There is a difference. I arrived in San Diego on a cool, overcast morning in late September. The city felt, as it always does, slightly unreal, too bright, too wide, too confident. Naval Base Coronado hummed with purposeful activity, yet there was an ease about it that bordered on the casual. I was met by a courteous lieutenant who drove me to the headquarters building in silence. Solid discipline, I noted. There I met the opposing task force commander, Rear Admiral Matthew Reeves, U.S. Navy. He was younger than I expected, mid-50s, lean, hair already steel gray. He wore khaki working rig rather than dress uniform, and his handshake was firm without theatrics. His voice was quiet, faintly Midwestern, devoid of banter. He simply said, "Welcome aboard, Commander. We're glad you're here," then briefed the exercise structure with concise professionalism. 2 balanced carrier strike groups would face each other across 8 days of free play scenarios. Standard simulation rules, no live weapons, joint umpiring team, victory determined by whoever first achieved decisive simulated damage against the opposing high-value unit. Reeves displayed no swagger, only a watchful calm that I found, irritatingly, rather impressive. That night, over dinner alone in the officers' mess, I began this journal. I wrote with the serene confidence of a man who believed he already knew the ending. We thought our traditions and experience would overmatch them. We were wrong. The exercise began the next morning. 8 scenarios, 8 days. A running tally kept quietly by both sides, though neither would admit it mattered. What follows is not the sanitized version I might one day offer to the Naval Review. It is what I wrote in my cabin at night while the ship steamed through the dark Pacific and the day's events were still sharp. Day 1 would be the last day I felt entirely in command. The first scenario began at 0600 on a morning so impeccably clear it seemed almost staged for our benefit. The Pacific stretched out flat and shimmering under a pale sunrise, visibility unlimited, wind a mere whisper at 5 knots, sea state 1. Conditions, in short, that rewarded patience, precision, and the subtle arts of detection and maneuver. Exactly the environment in which the Royal Navy has historically thrived. I stood on the flag bridge of HMS Queen Elizabeth with a mug of coffee gone cold in my hand, watching the American task force appear as a tidy cluster of icons on the operations plot, 60 nautical miles to the southwest. Admiral Reeves had positioned USS Abraham in the center of a textbook defensive formation, escorts in a ring at 20-mile intervals, air patrols orbiting conservatively, emissions disciplined tight. They were being cautious, almost respectful. I remember thinking, with a trace of condescension, that they were handing us the initiative on a silver platter. Our concept of operations was pure, unadulterated Royal Navy doctrine, refined through countless exercises in the North Atlantic and the Gulf. We would conduct a broad, silent search with Merlin helicopters and an E-7 Wedgetail flying high and quiet, fix the American disposition, then execute a deliberate enveloping maneuver with the surface action group while the carrier remained centrally placed but emissions silent. The objective was simple: achieve a valid firing solution on the Lincoln with Aster 30 missiles from our Type 45 destroyers before the Americans could do the same to us. In the simulation rules, first credible kill chain constituted victory. The opening phase unfolded with almost leisurely grace. Our helicopters located them first, unsurprisingly, since the American carrier group was keeping its powerful SPY-6 radars in standby. By 0745, we had a complete, high-confidence track on the entire formation. Lincoln, 4 Arleigh Burke destroyers, 2 Ticonderoga cruisers, and the usual screen of frigates and submarines, whose positions we could only infer. My flag lieutenant, Lieutenant Commander Cavendish, sharp, unflappable, with the dry wit one expects from a Cambridge graduate, turned to me with the faintest arch of an eyebrow. "They're steaming in a perfect circle, sir, almost as if they're waiting for us to demonstrate something." I allowed myself a small, tight smile. "Then let us oblige them." We advanced at a steady 24 knots, maintaining rigorous emissions control. Defender and Diamond slipped ahead on parallel tracks 30 miles in front of the carrier, their Samson multifunction radars passive, sipping data from the Americans' occasional emissions, like connoisseurs sampling a vintage port. Our F-35Bs flew racetrack patterns at medium altitude, careful not to betray our own position prematurely. Everything proceeded with the measured rhythm of a well-rehearsed orchestra. By 0837, both Type 45s had achieved solid fire control solutions on the Lincoln without once going active themselves. I gave the order to simulate launch. The umpires confirmed at 0849 full Aster salvo allocated to the carrier, multiple theoretical impacts amidships and on the island, mission kill declared, scenario terminated in our favor. The debrief at 0130 via secure video was almost perfunctory. Reeves appeared on the screen in working khakis, expression unreadable. "Well played, Commander," he said evenly. "Clean detection, textbook approach, and you never gave us a clear shot in return. We'll take that lesson. No excuses, no forced humor, no defensiveness, just quiet acknowledgement." I found his composure quite infuriating, as though he were already cataloging the loss for future reference rather than feeling it. Back in my sea cabin that evening, with the ship steaming gently on a base course and the Pacific night sliding past the scuttle, I opened the journal I had decided to keep. Day 1. Victory, and a comfortable one.
The Americans fought with restraint, almost deference, maintaining a tight defensive posture that played directly into our strengths. Their carrier remained centrally placed, escorts in a close screen, robust against submarines perhaps, but predictable from the surface and air. We exploited that predictability with textbook precision. Sensor operators, air crew, and weapons teams performed flawlessly. Coordination between the air wing and surface group was seamless. I confess to a private satisfaction. One does not often have the opportunity to remind the senior partner in the alliance who originally taught them the art of fleet work. Their technology is undeniably impressive, but technology without finesse is merely costly noise. Today, we demonstrated finesse. They will, I expect, study this engagement in detail. Good, let them learn what centuries of institutional memory can achieve. Reeves's demeanor remains characteristically understated, no visible frustration, only that calm, watchful quality, as though he were already adjusting variables in his head. We lead, and convincingly. Running score, United Kingdom 1, United States 0. I closed the book feeling entirely in command of the narrative. The sea was calm, the ship steady, and the Americans had been given a gentle but firm reminder of the value of tradition. It was the last night I would feel quite so certain.
The second scenario commenced at 07 under conditions that remained almost unnaturally benevolent. Scattered high cloud, a light southwesterly breeze at 8 knots, sea state 2, visibility unlimited. The Pacific continued to behave as though it wanted us to demonstrate the superiority of measured classical fleet work. I took my station on the flag bridge with the same quiet certainty as the previous day. 1-0 up, and the Americans would surely try to assert themselves more forcefully today. Excellent, let them come. We would absorb their energy and reply in the calm, economical manner that has defined British naval tradition for centuries. Their opening move was predictable in outline, if sharper in execution. By 07:25, the Lincoln Group was advancing at 28 knots, closing the initial 60-mile separation while launching multiple waves of E-2 Hawkeyes and F-35Cs in broad, overlapping search patterns. Emissions discipline was noticeably less rigorous than on day one. Their SPY-6 radars illuminated intermittently, and their Link 16 traffic was heavy. They were hunting aggressively. My staff and I had wargamed exactly this response the night before. We answered with a deliberate retirement to the northeast at 25 knots, drawing them onto a converging course that would backlight their air patrols against the rising sun. Our own F-35Bs flew low-level racetracks along the threat axis, using sea clutter for masking, while our Type 45s, Defender and Diamond, formed an advanced screen 30 miles ahead of Queen Elizabeth. The intent was classic: allow the Americans to overextend, then pivot the surface group across their line of advance and deliver a concentrated Aster salvo while their escorts were still committed forward. For the first 3 hours, the engagement developed almost precisely as we had sketched it on the chart table. Their air picture built slowly, hampered by our strict emissions control and the skillful low-level flying of our pilots. We, by contrast, constructed a near-perfect track on the Lincoln and her immediate escorts. By 10:15, both Type 45s had achieved valid firing solutions without ever going active on radar. Cavendish glanced at me again with that dry half-smile. "They're obliging us beautifully, sir." I gave the order. Simulated launch. The umpires confirmed at 10:28 multiple Aster 30 hits on the Lincoln, mission kill on the carrier, plus significant damage to 2 escorts. Scenario terminated in our favor. On the surface, another clean British victory. Yet something about the morning left an uneasy residue. The Americans had closed faster and reacted more fluidly than the day before.
When we executed our pivot at 0950, their destroyers performed an immediate high-speed wheel to unmask their own missile batteries, forcing Defender to break off her approach 20 minutes earlier than planned. Twice, simulated SM-6 salvos came uncomfortably close to bracketing Queen Elizabeth before our soft kill countermeasures and electronic warfare pods defeated them. On the plot, the outcome looked decisive. In the operations room, there had been several moments when the initiative felt perilously close to slipping. The debrief at 11:30 was, as always, understated on Reeves's part. He appeared on the screen looking rested and attentive. "Congratulations again, Commander," he said levelly. "You drew us in and punished the overreach. Cleanly done." Then, almost casually, he added, "We'll make some adjustments." No further elaboration, just those 3 words delivered in that same quiet Midwestern cadence. I studied his face for any hint of frustration. There was none, only that steady, observant calm. That evening, in the privacy of my sea cabin, I opened the journal with a hand that betrayed a faint, unfamiliar tremor. Day 2. Victory, but narrower than the tally suggests. We prevailed through superior patience and tactical geometry, precisely as doctrine prescribes. The Americans advanced predictably, allowing us to execute the planned envelopment. Aircrew, sensor operators, and weapons teams performed impeccably. Inter-unit coordination was textbook. Yet I cannot shake a growing disquiet. Their reaction times were markedly shorter than yesterday. Data link latency appeared negligible, fighters repositioned with an almost instinctive fluidity. On 3 occasions, we were compelled to expend countermeasures we had intended to conserve. The margin for error was thinner than I prefer. They are learning with disconcerting speed. Yesterday we taught restraint. Today they tested aggression and absorbed the consequences without complaint. Reeves's parting remark, "We'll make some adjustments," hangs in the air. There was no bravado in it, only quiet certainty. I reassure myself that this is merely professional respect for a capable adversary. But today's victory did not deliver the settled assurance of day 1. It felt conditional, provisional. We still lead comfortably, yet the foundation beneath that lead feels subtly less solid. Running score, United Kingdom 2, United States 0. I closed the journal and stood at the scuttle, watching the dark water slide past. Somewhere out there aboard Abraham Lincoln, planning teams were undoubtedly dissecting every track, every emission, every timing we had revealed. I wondered what adjustments Reeves had in mind, and whether our traditions would prove flexible enough to counter them. Sleep came, but it was lighter than the night before.
The third scenario began at 06 under a marked change in the weather. A low-pressure front had swept in overnight, bringing broken low cloud, frequent heavy squalls, and a freshening wind from the northwest gusting to 25 knots. Sea state had risen to 4, with short, steep waves marching across the operating area. Visibility fluctuated between 5 and 15 miles as rain cells drifted through. For the first time, the Pacific showed some teeth. I welcomed it. These were the conditions in which the Royal Navy has always felt most at home, grey, restless, demanding constant adjustment. The North Atlantic in winter has forged our doctrines. I assumed the Americans, more accustomed to the vast blue calm of their own ocean, would find the clutter and uncertainty disruptive to their high-tempo style. I could not have been more mistaken. From the opening minute, the tempo belonged entirely to them. The Lincoln Group did not wait for us to set the range or bearing. At 0607, they surged forward at 30 knots, launching aircraft in rapid, overlapping cycles, while their destroyers fanned out in an aggressive, staggered screen. Emissions discipline was thrown overboard. SPY-6 radars painted us in powerful, staggered bursts, and their data links carried a volume of traffic that suggested every platform was fused into a single nervous system. This was not cautious probing. This was a deliberate, high-intensity assault designed to compress time and force continuous reaction. We attempted our proven response: retire northward under strict emissions control, build the picture quietly with helicopters and low-level F-35Bs, then counterattack when they overcommitted. But the Americans allowed us no breathing space. Their F-35Cs flew in loose pairs at multiple altitudes, popping up briefly through the clutter to refresh tracks before vanishing again. Their Arleigh Burkes used active radar in short, unpredictable pulses that were devilishly hard to jam effectively. Submarines, whose presence we could only infer, appeared to be forward, constricting our maneuver room. By 7:45, they had fixed Queen Elizabeth's position to within 2 miles, despite our best decoys and course changes in the squalls. I ordered a high-speed turn to the east at 0803, hoping to break contact in a particularly heavy rain cell and reposition the Type 45s for a counterstroke. For perhaps 15 minutes, it seemed to work. The plot cleared as their tracks degraded. Then, at 0821, the first simulated SM-6 salvo appeared out of nowhere. 30 missiles allocated in 3 waves, launched from beyond the horizon and guided by off-board sensors we had never detected. Defender and Diamond fought brilliantly, defeating 2 waves with Aster and electronic warfare, but the third saturated the northern sector. The umpires ruled multiple hits on Defender. Mission kill, severe degradation of the entire air defense screen. From that moment, we were reacting, not acting. I committed our F-35Bs in a desperate attempt to regain the initiative, sending 14 aircraft in a low-level strike against the Lincoln herself. Our pilots flew magnificently through the murk and clutter, but the American Combat Air Patrol was already positioned, and their remaining escorts repositioned with unnerving precision to protect the carrier. We scored simulated kills on 1 cruiser and 2 destroyers, painful losses for them, but the cost was higher. 11 British aircraft ruled destroyed or degraded. The end came quickly. At 0912, a second coordinated strike package converged from south and west. With Defender gone and the screen fractured, we threw everything remaining into the defense: Sea Scepter, countermeasures, the last fighters. We bled them again. Umpires called 9 more American aircraft lost, but leakers got through. Multiple impacts on Queen Elizabeth, catastrophic damage, mission kill. Scenario terminated at 0918. Decisive American victory. The debrief at 01030 was brief and, on my part, tightly controlled. Reeves appeared on the screen looking, if anything, slightly weary rather than exultant. "That was a tough one, Commander. You made us earn every inch," he said. I managed a curt acknowledgement and offered congratulations in return. Inside, I felt only a cold surge of surprise and something perilously close to dismay. That night, I wrote with a heavier hand than on previous evenings. Day 3. Defeat. Comprehensive and sobering. We began the day confident that adverse weather would favor our patient all-weather doctrines. Instead, the Americans used the clutter and uncertainty as weapons, maintaining a tempo we could not match. They did not honor traditional rhythm of deliberate detection and engagement. They flooded the battle space with sensors, aircraft, and data, compressing decision cycles into seconds rather than minutes. They do not honor tradition. They honor speed, volume, and relentless adaptation. I watched the plot in real time and felt, for sustained periods, that command was slipping beyond recovery. Reserves committed too early, maneuvers reactive rather than proactive. The staff and crews performed with extraordinary professionalism under intolerable pressure,
but professionalism alone could not compensate for the asymmetry in pace. Reeves's calm remains absolute, no triumph in his manner, only that quiet, accumulating knowledge. I begin to understand that he has been calibrating us from the start, holding back until he understood our responses fully. One scenario does not define the exercise, and we still hold the overall lead, yet today felt like a threshold crossed. They have stopped learning from us. They are now teaching us what modern naval warfare has become. Running score: United Kingdom 2, United States 1. I closed the journal and stood at the scuttle for a long while, listening to the wind moan in the rigging and the hull work against the swells. For the first time since arriving in California, genuine concern settled in my chest like cold lead. We had 5 days left. I no longer assumed we would win.
The fourth scenario was scheduled to begin at 08, but a dense fog bank rolled in from the north just before dawn, blanketing the operating area in gray opacity. Visibility fell to less than half a mile, radar horizons shrank, and the umpires postponed the start by 2 hours. When they finally cleared us to commence at 10, the fog had lifted to a patchy haze that clung stubbornly to the water in drifting veils. Sea State 4, with a long westerly swell running beneath the chop and occasional rain showers sweeping through. It was a sullen, shifting morning, the sort that rewards caution and punishes overconfidence. By now we knew what to expect. The Americans would press hard from the outset. My staff and I had spent the delay refining our response: more aggressive initial positioning of the Type 45s, faster emissions protocols when required, heavier reliance on low-level F-35Bs to contest the outer air zone. We would not be caught flat-footed again. We would meet them in the middle and force a prolonged attritional engagement on terms that at least partly favored discipline over pure speed. For the first 90 minutes, it almost succeeded. Mutual detection occurred at 10:23, nearly simultaneous. The Lincoln Group advanced in a loose adaptive wedge. Escorts staggered in depth to provide overlapping sensor arcs even through the haze. Their air wing flew continuous cycles, F-35Cs at varying altitudes, FA-18s lower, feeding a fused picture that refreshed every few seconds. We countered by splitting the surface group early. Defender and Duncan pushed 40 miles ahead on diverging bearings, while Queen Elizabeth held a central but deceptive position with the Type 23 frigates and remaining destroyers in close screen. What followed was the longest, most evenly contested engagement of the exercise to date. The Americans maintained relentless pressure, attempting to collapse our forward screen with coordinated air and surface strikes from multiple bearings. Their destroyers executed high-speed dashes through clear patches to gain fleeting fire control tracks, while their aircraft feinted, probed, and occasionally committed hard against gaps. We responded with equal aggression: rapid repositioning of the Type 45s, intensive electronic warfare to spoof or break locks, counterstrikes by our own F-35Bs aimed at disrupting their cap and drawing off escorts. The plot became a swirling chaos of tracks merging, separating, degrading, and reappearing. At 11:17, Duncan achieved a brief but valid firing solution on the Lincoln through a temporary radar window and launched a simulated full Aster salvo before an American SM-6 wave forced her to break off. Umpires ruled partial hits on the carrier, degraded air operations but not mission kill. Minutes later, an American strike package saturated Defender's sector. She defeated the first wave but took simulated damage from the second, reducing her effectiveness by half. At 12:08, we mounted a concerted counterattack, 12 F-35Bs converging from north and east under heavy jamming, supported by surface illumination from 3 directions. The Americans shifted escorts smoothly to cover the carrier, their cap intercepting aggressively. We lost 8 aircraft but scored hits on 2 Arleigh Burkes and a cruiser, forcing them to reduce speed and emissions.
For nearly 4 hours, neither side could deliver a decisive blow. Reserves dwindled on both sides. Countermeasures were expended at a prodigious rate. Decision cycles shortened to the point where intuition began to replace analysis. The umpires finally intervened at 13:52, calling the scenario a draw. Both carriers damaged but operational. Objectives only partially achieved by either force. No clear mission kill. The score was level. The debrief at 1500 felt almost collegial. Reeves allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "One hell of a scrap, Commander," he said. "You kept us completely honest today. Nobody walked away with an easy win." I returned the sentiment with real respect. For the first time, the exchange felt like dialogue between peers rather than instructor and student. But parity, I was learning, is an uncomfortable place to linger. That night, I wrote with a mixture of exhaustion and foreboding. Day 4, draw. The first time neither side has achieved clear dominance. The engagement was prolonged, intense, and extraordinarily taxing. Both task groups operated at the absolute limit of their doctrines. The Americans sustained their characteristic high tempo, refusing to grant us any respite to reimpose classical rhythm. We, for our part, abandoned some of our habitual caution: faster emissions, riskier maneuvers, heavier commitment of air assets early. We drew us into their style of warfare: rapid, near-continuous action across all domains, decisions compressed in seconds, adaptation in real time. We matched them creditably. Our people rose magnificently to the challenge, but matching is not the same as mastering. I watched my operations team working at a sustained pitch I seldom seen outside actual hostilities. Today we did not lose, yet neither did we win on our terms. We were pulled irrevocably into their tempo, forced to mirror their aggression stroke for stroke. The draw feels less like equilibrium than like the calm before one side finally gains irreversible advantage. Reeves's demeanor has shifted subtly, still quiet, still watchful, but now laced with the confidence of a man who knows his machine is running at full capacity while ours is straining. His compliment was sincere, yet it carried an undertone. They are no longer calibrating us. They are competing on equal terms, and perhaps beginning to believe they hold the edge. We have been dragged into a war we did not choose, and we are holding our own. Barely. Running score, United Kingdom, 2, United States, 2. I poured a small whiskey, strictly against regulations in exercise conditions, but some nights demand it, and stood at the scuttle watching the haze thin under a weak afternoon sun. 4 days remained. The momentum no longer felt ours. Tomorrow we would fight to regain the initiative. I was no longer certain we could.
The fifth scenario commenced at 07:30 on a morning that felt almost conciliatory after the previous day's slog. High overcast but dry, wind northwest at 15 knots, moderate swell, visibility unlimited. The air was crisp and the sea manageable, conditions that favored precise coordination and layered operations more than raw speed. I took the bridge with a renewed sense of purpose. After the exhausting draw on day 4, my staff and I had concluded that attempting to match the Americans stroke for stroke in their preferred chaos was unsustainable. We would revert to core strengths: disciplined defense in depth, strict economy of force, and a single, perfectly timed counterstroke delivered with everything we had. The plan was rooted in hard experience rather than innovation. Queen Elizabeth would occupy a central but deceptive position, radiating false emitters and ghost tracks while remaining emissions silent herself. The Type 45 destroyers would operate in paired teams 40 to 50 miles out on the primary threat axes, using Samson radars only in short, decisive bursts. Our F-35Bs would maintain conservative combat air patrols, preserving fuel and weapons for the critical moment. We would let the Americans hammer at the outer screen, bleed their strikes through attrition, then commit the full weight of air and surface power in one concentrated riposte. For the first 2 hours, the engagement unfolded with an almost reassuring familiarity. The Lincoln Group advanced aggressively at 0810, closing to 50 miles while cycling aircraft in dense, overlapping waves. Their emissions were heavy, their maneuvers bold, high-speed sprints by the destroyers to gain bearing advantage, continuous radar illumination. But this time we refused to be drawn early. We absorbed the pressure, shifting the screen gradually, presenting decoys, defeating locks with electronic warfare without committing to full-scale engagement. The first real test came at 10:08. A strong American strike package, 14 simulated F-35Cs escorted by FA-18s, pushed hard against our northern quadrant, clearly intending to saturate Defender and Duncan and punch a corridor straight to the carrier. I watched the plot with the old steady calm as our destroyers executed a textbook response. Brief active illumination, coordinated Aster 30 salvos at maximum range, supported by 8 of our own F-35Bs vectoring in from the west under intensive jamming. The umpire's calls came rapidly. 10 American aircraft destroyed outright, the remainder forced to withdraw after jettisoning ordnance. The strike collapsed with momentum firmly broken. That hesitation provided the window we had waited for. At 10:42, I authorized the counterstroke. 18 F-35Bs launched in 2 precisely timed waves armed with simulated Spear 3 and Meteor loads configured for anti-ship strikes. They approached on 3 converging axes, north, east, and southeast, screened by heavy electronic warfare from the Type 45s and Type 23 frigates. The next 8 minutes were the most intense of the entire exercise. The plot erupted in tracks, countermeasures, and simulated detonations. American caps scrambled frantically. Dense SM-6, SM-2, and ESSM salvos reached out in layered barrages. The umpires ruled 11 British aircraft lost, severe but within calculation. Then came the calls we needed. Repeated Spear 3 penetrations on USS Abraham Lincoln, hits on the island, flight deck, and hangar. Mission kill declared. Additional strikes ruled mission kill on 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers and severe degradation on a Ticonderoga cruiser. At 11:07, the umpires terminated the scenario. Decisive victory to the United Kingdom. The debrief at 12:45 carried a different tone. Reeves appeared on screen looking genuinely fatigued yet gracious. "That was outstandingly executed, Commander. You let us burn energy against your screen, then hit us with perfect timing and weight. We have no excuses. That one was earned." I accepted the praise with real gratitude. His candor was disarming. Yet even in clear victory, the portents were impossible to ignore. The Americans had sustained their ferocious tempo to the final moments. Aircraft regenerated without visible pause, data links held solid, surviving escorts repositioned with a fluidity that suggested untapped reserves. They had been defeated, but not exhausted. Their machine had taken a heavy blow and continued turning. That night I wrote with satisfaction, shadowed by a deepening chill. Day 5. Victory. Clean, decisive, and executed in the finest traditions of the service. We prevailed through iron discipline, precise timing, and refusal to be seduced by premature commitment. The staff, air crews, and weapons teams performed at a level I have rarely witnessed. Coordination across domains was near faultless. For one morning, we imposed our rhythm entirely. And yet the Americans never faltered in theirs. Even after the killing strike, they maneuvered and regenerated as though the outcome were merely another data point. Their capacity to absorb punishment while maintaining operational intensity is profoundly unsettling. Reeves' composure remains unbroken, quiet, observant, already dissecting what we revealed today. I tell myself this proves the enduring strength of our way when properly applied, but the evidence of the past days is inescapable. They are closing the gap with a speed that defies institutional inertia. Today we dictated terms. I am no longer confident we shall do so again. This, I believe, was the final occasion on which we fully controlled the engagement. Running score: United Kingdom 3, United States 2. I closed the journal and stood at the scuttle, watching the running lights of the escorts rise and fall against a darkening sea. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Reeves and his team were already evolving their approach. 3 days remained. I now understood that the question was not whether we would win the exercise, but how heavily we would lose it, and what that defeat would teach us about the future of naval power.
The sixth scenario started at 0545. Deliberately early, I suspected, to catch us before full readiness. The weather had turned thoroughly unpleasant. Low, scudding cloud, intermittent heavy rain, southwesterly wind gusting 35 knots, sea state 5, verging on 6. White water streaked the waves, and the ship rolled deeply even at 20 knots. Visibility varied wildly between 3 and 12 miles as squalls marched across the area. These were conditions that should have favored experience and caution. Instead, they became the perfect medium for American velocity. They wasted no time. At 0552, the Lincoln Group was already advancing at 32 knots on a direct intercept course, air wing launching in relentless cycles before we had completed dawn action stations. Their data links burned bright. Every platform seemed integrated into a single hyper-responsive organism. Emissions were unrestricted, active radars sweeping in complex, unpredictable patterns that made jamming inefficient. This was not an attack. This was a saturation. We attempted to reassert control through distance. At 0605, I ordered a high-speed retirement to the north at 28 knots, seeking to open the range to 70 miles and use the squalls for masking while we rebuilt the picture. The Americans simply matched speed, turned with us, and continued closing. Their F-35Cs flew low and fast in dispersed pairs, using the wave tops and rain cells as cover to refresh tracks. Their destroyers operated in independent pairs, sprinting forward between showers to gain fleeting but lethal radar windows. By 0720, they had closed to 45 miles and achieved high-confidence tracks on Queen Elizabeth, despite our decoys, course zigzags, and heaviest electronic countermeasures. I committed 12 F-35Bs early in a spoiling attack against their northern screen, hoping to disrupt their air picture and buy time. The strike met prepared cap and layered SAM barrages. We inflicted simulated damage on one cruiser and forced 2 destroyers to maneuver defensively, but at the cost of 8 aircraft ruled destroyed. The American advance did not slow. The decisive phase began at 0748. 3 separate strike packages, totaling over 30 simulated aircraft, converged from northwest, south, and east in a 90-second window, perfectly timed to saturate our defenses. Defender and Duncan fought with extraordinary skill. Coordinated Aster salvos, electronic warfare, and rapid repositioning defeated the first 2 waves almost entirely, but the third wave overwhelmed the northern sector. Multiple hits on Duncan, mission kill declared at 0802. With the screen fractured, the follow-on strikes targeted the carrier directly. We threw every remaining asset into the inner defense, the last fighters, Sea Scepter from the Type 23s, every decoy and jammer in the inventory. We bled them heavily. Umpires called 15 American aircraft destroyed or degraded, but volume told. At 0827, leakers penetrated the final layer. Repeated impacts on Queen Elizabeth, flight deck, island, hangar. Catastrophic damage. Mission kill. Scenario terminated at 0834. Clear American victory. The debrief at 10:15 was curt. Reeves looked energized rather than triumphant. "You punished us hard for every mile, Commander," he said, "but we forced the tempo this time." I offered measured congratulations.
Inside, I felt only a cold, precise acknowledgement of superior execution. That night, I wrote with a steadiness that surprised even me. Day 6, defeat. Swift, comprehensive, and entirely earned by the opponent. We entered intending to dictate space and rhythm through disciplined withdrawal and counterstroke. Instead, we were denied the luxury of choice. The Americans imposed continuous multi-domain pressure that allowed no pause for regrouping or deliberate planning. They accepted attrition in the outer zones and overwhelmed us with coordinated mass and speed. They no longer play by the old rules. There is no respectful distance, no measured exchange of probes, only relentless forward pressure until the defense cracks. Their adaptation appears complete. Our responses, however professional, are now predictably one beat behind. I watched the operations room for nearly 3 hours and felt command reduced to crisis management. Reserves committed prematurely, maneuvers reactive rather than proactive. The staff and crews performed heroically under conditions that bordered on the unsustainable, yet heroism could not compensate for the fundamental mismatch in operational pace. Reeves's calm has evolved into something more assured. Not arrogance, never that, but the quiet confidence of a commander whose system is now operating at higher evolutionary speed than ours. The tally is level again, but momentum is unequivocally theirs. Running score: United Kingdom 3, United States 3. I closed the journal and remained at the desk for a long while, listening to the storm batter the superstructure and the great turbines thrum beneath my feet. 2 days remained. I no longer harbored illusions about the final score. The question had become how complete the margin would be, and whether the Royal Navy, with all its proud history, could absorb the lesson without fracturing.
The seventh scenario began at 0630 in conditions that had worsened overnight into something close to a full gale. Low, racing cloud, frequent heavy rain squalls driven by a westerly wind gusting 40 knots, sea state 6 with steep, breaking waves. The ship pitched and rolled heavily even at reduced speed. Spray lashed the bridge windows, and the horizon vanished periodically behind walls of gray water. This was weather I knew intimately from years in the North Atlantic, raw, unforgiving, the kind that separates competent fleets from great ones. I told myself it would force the Americans to slow, to respect the elements, to allow us room to breathe and reimpose our style of deliberate, layered warfare. I was wrong for the last time. They adapted as though the storm were an ally rather than an obstacle. At 0635, the Lincoln Group was already advancing at 28 knots through the chaos, formation loose and flexible, escorts operating in dispersed pairs that used the squalls for concealment while maintaining a fused air and surface picture. Their aircraft launched in continuous, staggered cycles, F-35Cs flying low over the wavetops, accepting the risk of salt ingestion and turbulence to keep sensors active. Data links held firm despite the weather. Tracks updated with a persistence that suggested their combat systems were compensating automatically for clutter, pitch, and roll in ways our own still could not match reliably. We attempted to stabilize the battle space with a conservative posture. Queen Elizabeth held a central position at the heart of Tight Diamond, radiating multiple decoy tracks, while the remaining effective Type 45s, Defender and Diamond, formed an outer screen at 40 miles on the main threat bearings. The plan was textbook. Endure the initial storm of probes, attrite their forward assets in the clutter, then counter when the weather gave us fleeting windows of advantage. But the Americans controlled the geometry from the first exchange. The opening salvo came at 0718, a coordinated air-surface strike from the northwest, 12 simulated F-35Cs popping up through a rain cell to illuminate, followed immediately by over-the-horizon SM-6 launches from 2 Arleigh Burkes sprinting ahead of the carrier. We defeated the missiles with Aster and countermeasures, but the illumination forced us to reveal active radars earlier than planned. Tracks solidified on both sides. From that moment, we were always a fraction behind. I ordered a series of high-speed turns to break lock and reposition in the squalls, but their destroyers mirrored each maneuver with unnerving precision, maintaining bearing drift and closing inexorably to 35 miles by 0810. Their aircraft operated with a freedom that bordered on recklessness, low, fast, accepting losses to weather and our defenses in order to keep pressure constant. We shot down 9 simulated aircraft in the outer zone, but the cost in missiles and attention was high. The decisive blow fell at 0847. Without perceptible warning, 4 separate strike packages, totaling more than 40 aircraft, converged in a carefully staggered sequence that exploited successive lulls between squalls. Defender, already strained from earlier engagements, faced the heaviest weight. She fought magnificently. Aster salvos, electronic warfare, rapid course changes, but saturation told. Multiple hits ruled at 0853, mission kill. With the northern screen gone, the remaining strikes turned inward. Diamond and the inner layer threw everything into the defense. Sea Scepter, remaining fighters, every jammer and decoy. We inflicted grievous attrition. Umpires called 18 American aircraft destroyed or degraded, but the volume was simply too great. At 0912, the final wave penetrated. Repeated impacts on Queen Elizabeth, flight deck crippled, island damaged, engineering spaces flooded in simulation. Catastrophic mission kill. Scenario terminated at 0917. Decisive American victory. The debrief at 11 o'clock was almost perfunctory. Reeves appeared on screen soaked in spray himself, yet composed. "You made us fight for every inch in that weather, Commander," he said. "Respect." I returned the sentiment with rigid courtesy. There was nothing else to say. That night, I wrote with a cold clarity that felt like acceptance. Day 7. Defeat. Thorough, professional, and entirely conclusive. We entered the day believing the storm would grant us the respite to reassert control through caution and experience. Instead, the Americans used the weather as a force multiplier, maintaining cohesion and tempo where we expected fragmentation. Their platforms operated with a decentralized confidence that allowed independent action within a unified picture. Our attempts to impose stability were rendered irrelevant by their refusal to slow. We were defeated by our own virtues. We remained too cautious with reserves, too reluctant to break formation radically, too confident that deliberate rhythm would eventually prevail. They accepted risk, dispersed, recombined, and overwhelmed us one sector at a time. I watched the operations room for 3 hours and recognized with absolute certainty that we were no longer competing on equal terms. Decisions were sound by every doctrinal measure, yet always one tempo late. The staff performed with the highest professionalism, but professionalism rooted in a paradigm that is being superseded. Reeves's calm is no longer merely watchful, it is the quiet assurance of a commander who knows his force has evolved beyond ours. There is no gloating, only respect for a worthy opponent who has been outpaced. One day remains. It will be for pride, not victory. Running score, United Kingdom 3, United States 4. I closed the journal and did not reopen it that night. Outside, the gale howled unabated, and the ship labored through heavy seas towards the final reckoning. I no longer feared the outcome. I understood it.
The final scenario was scheduled to begin at 07. The weather had moderated somewhat overnight,
Wind down to 25 knots from the west, sea state 4 with a long rolling swell beneath scattered showers, but the air felt heavy, expectant. This was the last day, the last engagement. Both sides knew it. Though neither fleet would ever admit publicly that the running tally mattered, we all felt the weight of it. One more victory for us would leave the exercise respectably close. One more for them would make the margin unambiguous. I took the bridge at 0715 with a calm that surprised even me. After 7 days of escalating pressure, there was a strange clarity in knowing this was the endgame. Pride, quiet, stubborn British pride, demanded we fight the day as though reputation itself hung in the balance. My staff sensed it too. The operations room was hushed, focused, almost solemn. We had refined the plan through the small hours, a highly mobile defense, aggressive use of the remaining Type 45s as roving hunters, early commitment of the full F-35B complement to contest air superiority from the outset. We would not wait to be overwhelmed. We would seize initiative early and hold it at any cost. At 0702, the umpires declared the scenario live. The Americans did not advance. They erupted. From the first minute, the Lincoln Group moved with a coordinated violence I had not seen even in the previous defeats. Speed 30 knots sustained, formation dispersed yet tightly linked, every platform, carrier, destroyers, cruisers, submarines, operating with apparent autonomy within a single flawless picture. Their air wing launched in a continuous surge, waves of F-35Cs and FA-18s at multiple altitudes and bearings, data links fusing tracks in real time with an ease that made our own efforts feel ponderous. Emissions were total, active radars sweeping in complex shifting patterns that adapted instantly to our jamming. We met them head-on. At 0715, I ordered the Type 45s forward in a bold sweep 30 miles ahead of Queen Elizabeth, radars active, seeking early engagement. Our full complement of F-35Bs, 24 aircraft, launched simultaneously in 3 strike groups, aiming to disrupt their CAP and target the Lincoln before their screen could solidify. For perhaps 20 minutes, it almost worked. We achieved fleeting tracks on 2 Arleigh Burkes and forced their northern escorts to maneuver defensively. Umpires called 6 American aircraft destroyed in the initial clash, but the response was immediate and overwhelming. By 0738, their destroyers had executed a series of high-speed countersprints, unmasking batteries and launching dense SM-6 salvos, while their CAP regenerated with astonishing speed. Defender, committed deep forward, faced 3 separate waves in rapid succession. She defeated the first 2 with Aster and electronic warfare, but the third saturated her defenses. Multiple hits at 0749. Mission kill. Diamond, attempting to cover the gap, took severe simulated damage minutes later, reduced to half effectiveness. With the outer screen compromised, the weight shifted inward. I ordered Queen Elizabeth to maximum speed and radical maneuvers, attempting to break contact in a passing shower while the inner layer, Type 23 frigates, and the carrier's own systems prepared for close defense. But the Americans had anticipated every turn. Their strike packages reformed seamlessly, accepting attrition to maintain pressure. Submarines, whose positions we had only guessed at, contributed off-board targeting that denied us sanctuary. The final phase began at 8:27. 4 coordinated strikes converged from every point of the compass, totaling more than 50 simulated aircraft in overlapping waves. Our remaining fighters met them in a desperate furball over the carrier. Sea Scepter and short-range systems fired continuously. We inflicted brutal losses. Umpires called 22 American aircraft destroyed or degraded, but the mathematics were merciless. Leakers appeared on the plot in 1s and 2s, then in 5s and 6s. The first impacts came at 8:41. Simulated spear and harpoon equivalents, striking the flight deck and island. More followed in rapid succession. Hangar, radars, command spaces. By 0853, the umpires ruled the carrier non-operational. Flight deck destroyed, air wing trapped below, command and control degraded beyond recovery. Mission kill. Catastrophic. Yet even then, the simulation continued for another 12 minutes as the Americans pressed the advantage, neutralizing the remaining escorts. Diamond took a final salvo and sank in simulation. 2 Type 23s were ruled mission killed. When the umpires finally terminated the scenario at 0905, the British task group was, for all practical purposes, annihilated. Final score: decisive American victory. The debrief at 0100 was quiet, almost funeral. Reeves appeared on the screen looking drained yet unmistakably satisfied, not triumphant, never that, but aware of what had been achieved. That was the hardest day any of us have ever fought in an exercise. You never gave us an inch we didn't pay for in blood. Thank you for the privilege of matching you. I replied with equal sincerity. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to hide behind. That evening, I returned to my sea cabin for the last time during the exercise. The ship steamed steadily toward San Diego under clearing skies, the storm finally spent. I opened the journal and wrote without hesitation or self-pity. Day 8, defeat. Total, unequivocal, and entirely deserved. We entered the final day determined to contest every mile, to seize initiative early and force the engagement on terms that at least partially favored us. For a brief period, we did exactly that. The initial commitment of air and surface assets was bold and professionally executed. We drew first blood. But the Americans responded with a level of integration, adaptability, and sustained intensity we could not match. Their task group operated as a single distributed organism, dispersed yet perfectly coordinated, accepting local risk and attrition to achieve decisive mass at the critical point. Every platform, every aircraft, every sensor contributed in real time to a picture we could not disrupt for minutes. We lost because we could not evolve as quickly as they did. Our decisions, though sound by every measure of doctrine and experience, were rooted in a paradigm of deliberate rhythm and institutional caution. Theirs were rooted in speed, volume, and relentless forward pressure. When we committed reserves, they had already anticipated and countered. When we maneuvered for advantage, they had already repositioned. When we fought with everything we had, they simply had more. More aircraft cycling, more missiles in the air, more options regenerating faster than we could deplete them. I felt no anger during the engagement, only a cold recognition of superior execution. The operations room performed with extraordinary courage and skill under conditions that pushed human and system limits alike. Yet skill within an older framework could not prevail against a newer one operating at a higher tempo. Reeves never gloated, never needed to. His quiet respect throughout the exercise was genuine and all the more devastating for it. They did not win through luck or overwhelming material superiority alone. They won because they had evolved faster, adapted more ruthlessly, and executed with a cohesion we could admire, but not equal. There is no shame in being beaten by a better force on the day. There is only the necessity to learn. Final score, United Kingdom 3, United States 5. I closed the journal and set the pen aside. Outside, the Pacific lay calm and indifferent under a pale afternoon sun. In 2 days, we would berth in San Diego, exchange handshakes and platitudes, and fly home. But the real work would begin then. Absorbing what we had learned, questioning assumptions we had carried for decades, and beginning the long, painful process of becoming something new. Tradition had not protected us. Pride had not sufficed. We had been humbled, not by arrogance on their part, but by excellence. And in that humbling lay the only path forward.
The exercise ended as the sun rose over a calm Pacific on the morning we steamed into San Diego. Formal handshakes on the quarterdeck, speeches about alliance strength and shared values, photographs for the files. Reeves and I exchanged a final private word on the flight deck of Queen Elizabeth, while photographers waited discreetly at a distance. He said only, "You gave us more than we bargained for, James. We won't forget what we learned." I replied that the debt was mutual. We both knew it was not. This journal will never be published in my lifetime. It is too candid, perhaps too painful. But I set down these final thoughts because someone, someday, must read them without the varnish of official reports or the defensiveness of wounded pride. We lost 3-5. The margin feels wider than 2 scenarios. I have spent weeks since our return turning the engagement over in my mind, discussing it in strictest confidence with my staff, and quietly reviewing the data with analysts at Northwood. The conclusions are unavoidable, and they are uncomfortable for a service that has always believed its greatest strength lay in its history. Tradition does not protect you in modern naval warfare. It can guide you, steady you, even inspire you, but it will not by itself prevail against an opponent who has out-evolved you. We entered the exercise believing that our depth of experience, our institutional memory stretching back centuries, would allow us to dictate terms against superior technology and numbers. We left understanding that experience calcifies as readily as it instructs. What we mistook for patience, the Americans saw as hesitation. What we prized as measured judgment, they exploited as predictability. The Royal Navy remains a force of extraordinary professionalism. Our people, officers, ratings, air crews, fought the 8 days with skill and tenacity that would have carried the day in any previous era. But professionalism rooted in an older paradigm is not enough when the paradigm itself has shifted. The Americans did not defeat us with overwhelming material superiority alone, though their advantages in aircraft numbers, sensor fusion, and data throughput were undeniable. They defeated us with speed of adaptation, decentralized execution, and an institutional willingness to accept controlled risk in pursuit of decisive tempo. We are the Navy of Nelson, centralized command, decisive battle, the weather gauge. They are the Navy of Nimitz and Spruance, amplified by 21st century technology, distributed lethality, continuous operation, the information gauge. We sought the perfect moment to strike once and end it. They sought to create continuous dilemmas until we broke. There is no shame in recognizing this. There would be shame in denying it. I think often of Reeves, his quiet manner, his lack of bravado, the way he watched and adjusted without ever revealing frustration or elation. He commanded not through force of personality, but through a system that allowed every captain, every pilot, every sensor operator to act with initiative inside a shared real-time understanding of the battle space. We still command through hierarchy and deliberation, refined over generations, but increasingly mismatched against opponents who have flattened decision cycles to seconds. The comparisons are inevitable and unflattering. We bring depth and discipline. They bring speed and adaptability. We excel at the set-piece engagement, the carefully orchestrated riposte. They excel at the continuous campaign, the relentless accumulation of advantage. We preserve cohesion through caution. They preserve it through controlled dispersion and rapid recombination. We are very good at what we have always done. They are becoming masters of what war is becoming. This is not to say the Royal Navy is obsolete, far from it. Our platforms remain world-class, our training rigorous, our people second to none. But we have been coasting on institutional capital accumulated over decades, perhaps centuries, and that capital is being spent faster than we are replenishing it.
The Americans, for all their advantages, invest relentlessly in experimentation, in failing fast, in pushing authority downward and technology outward. They treat every exercise as a laboratory. We too often treat them as demonstrations. I do not advocate abandoning our traditions wholesale. That would be as foolish as clinging to them blindly. Nelson's genius lay in understanding when to break the line, when to disregard the fighting instructions. We need a new generation of officers willing to do the equivalent today, willing to question sacred assumptions about emissions control, formation integrity, decision timelines. We need to learn how to operate at American tempo without losing the cool-headedness that has always distinguished British command. The special relationship is real and valuable, but it has lulled us into complacency. We have grown accustomed to being the senior partner in experience, the quiet tutors of seamanship to a brash younger ally. Pacific Crown reminded us forcefully that the pupil has outgrown the master in several critical dimensions. We can learn from them without becoming them. Indeed, we must, because potential adversaries are watching closely, and some of them are learning the same lessons even faster. Final thought, written now in the quiet of my home in Hampshire, months after the event. We did not lose because we were weak. We lost because we believed we would always be right. That belief is the most dangerous legacy any navy can carry. History is littered with fleets that ruled the waves until the moment they assumed they always would. I close this journal with neither bitterness nor despair, but with a cold, clear determination. The Royal Navy has been humbled before, after the American Revolution, after the interwar years of neglect, after the Falklands, when hard truths were forced upon us. Each time we adapted, often painfully, and emerged stronger. We shall do so again, but this time the adaptation must be deeper, faster, and more ruthless than any in living memory. Because the next time we fight for real, there will be no umpires to call time, no reset at the end of the day, only victory or oblivion. Commander James Harrington, Royal Navy, December 2025.